All right, so as you recall, in the last video, we were doing some things where we would put in a name and click on the button, and it would show that in our inner HTML of our p tag. Well, now I want to redo that whole JavaScript into jQuery and show you a couple of concepts here. So I'm going to make this preview go away, and we're going to start from a skeleton that I've set up, where I have the same HTML we've had before in the last video, and all I have now is a link to a CDN for my jQuery library. And I'm going to pull up some things in W3 Schools just to give you a reference of where we're going, and gives you a place to look it up for your own edification. First thing I want to reintroduce you to is this idea of the document ready. If you read the documentation on the document ready for jQuery's document ready library, this event will fire when the DOM has been loaded. Now this is a little different from the window on load, because the window on load in JavaScript waits for not only the DOMs, the HTML elements to all be rendered, but also waits for all of the assets like the images to all be downloaded before it gets fired. And the idea behind jQuery's document ready is that it does not wait for the images or any of the assets to be downloaded. It fires immediately as soon as the DOM is ready. That's what this is describing to you here. So if you look at the syntax, you see document ready, and then here is a function. So this is where we're starting to see use for the anonymous functions. Some other things I want to point out before I get to the code, because we're going to be utilizing this. On jQuery events, we have a click event. So this is similar to our click event that we did with our add event listener. And if we look at the click event, sure enough, it also has an anonymous function. This should start to look familiar. So we can, on a click event, send an anonymous function and execute lines of code. And the next one I wanted to bring to your attention is under the jQuery, jQuery get and jQuery set, we have these elements, text. We're going to be using text and val. And text is synonymous with our inner HTML, and value is getting the value out of a text box. So an input text box. So this gives you some documentation as to some of the things I'm going to be utilizing in this code. So let's put that aside and start to get to work. All right, so in my script tag, as I mentioned, the first thing I'm going to start off with is that document ready. So there's my library, jQuery library, document, spelled correctly, .ready, and it is a method that has an opening and closing parentheses and then the closing semicolon. Remember that I can put in a function, so I'm going to put an anonymous function. I'll put the word function. It does not have a name, so I'm just going to do the opening and closing parentheses of my function, and then the opening and closing curly braces. Close up my white spaces so that doesn't look so messy, and there we go. We've got our stub for document ready, and it's going to execute an anonymous function as soon as the document is ready. As soon as the DOM is loaded, the image is not necessarily. All right, so if you remember from the syntax on the click event, we saw that it can also execute an anonymous function immediately. So let us use our jQuery selector for the print name, which was our button. Okay, so print name, when it clicks, when somebody clicks on it, then we are going to, there's the click event, and then inside of that I'm going to put in a function which is anonymous, so it doesn't have a name, open and closing parentheses because we don't have any arguments that we're wanting to receive, and then the open and closing curly braces for that function. Close up that white space so it's a little bit cleaner. Okay, so what's going to happen? I guess I have to spell function correctly, and see, there we go. So what's going to happen when we click on that button? Well, first remember we have to get the value out of the text box, and then we were going to put the value of that into our p tag. So let's get the value first. So I'm just going to do a variable input value is equal to, so again I can use my jQuery selector, which is an ID of first name dot val. Okay, so this is getting, in jQuery's way, whatever value was put into this text box, and that's getting input to this variable. And then if we look at our documentation again, I can use text, which was similar to our inner HTML before. So a jQuery selector of ID display name, which should be my p tags right here. So I'm selecting these p tags that have the ID name, display name, dot, and then text. And I'm going to put in the input value. Okay, so let's see if that works here in my preview HTML. So if it works, I can put in my name. And it looks like we've got something that's not quite working right. So what I'll do then is load this onto a browser. All right, so let's bring over a, so we're going to debug it out of curiosity. So when I click on display, nothing is working. So I'm going to come into my debugger. I'm going to click on maybe line 11 so I can watch what happens when I click on the button. When I click on display, I can see very clearly that I'm not going into this particular function, which means that the click event is not working. And if I look closely at the line then for the click event, I can see that, well, I didn't put the ID, did I? So it's not actually calling that. So let's fix that. So we have to fix it here. So this time, if I put that print event, let's see if it works this time. So if I click on display, it is in fact working. And if I wanted to see that, I'm going to bring this back over just for debugging purposes. If I wanted to see that actually working here, now you can see that this hasn't been updated. So I'm going to hit Shift and reload to clear out the cache. And then I can see, well, now that display is clearly there. The ID hashtag is there. So if I type something in and I were to run through the debugger again, it did in fact stop here. And then I could step through each line of code. Whoa, that's something I don't really want to mess with. That looks like jQuery stuff. So I can click this button here that says step out. And I'm going to step out again until I get returned to where I want to be. And then I could step through it and continue on with my debugging. So, again, I don't want to be in that mess. Don't want to mess with jQuery. And I can see that that line of code ran and then my name is there. So that seemed to work well. All right, but what I can also do is something called chaining. And so if I wanted to even save myself another step, rather than putting all of this information into a variable, I can take this line of code. I'm going to cut it out of there and replace it in here. Delete this. And so now what I'm doing is in essence the same thing, but we're chaining. So things are going to be evaluated from the inside out. So the very first thing that's going to be evaluated is it's going to get the value out of that text box. The input box right here. And then whatever gets returned from that evaluation is going to be put into the text of this portion. So let's see if that works. Make sure I save it. I see the little blue button, so it's not saved. Now it's saved. And then I type in my name and it should work. And there you go. So 2 ways to do the same thing. But look at, this is the same code that we did in the prior video, but utilizing anonymous functions for examples, but also seeing how jQuery can do the same thing. And what is this? 6 lines of code as opposed to all of the however many lines of code we had in that last one. So let's see. I don't think I have a copy of that up. Oh, there you go. So same concept, just using jQuery, and then of course demonstrating anonymous functions.